Could the Philippines have a civil war over the next few months because of the extreme political polarization surrounding this current presidential election cycle? Is this something we should be worrying about? A civil war, could it happen? Unfortunately, I've been thinking about this a bit too much over the past few months, if not past few years, and as I continue to observe what's been going on in the Philippines recently with this new election cycle, it seems like the degree of political polarization and the intensity of the dissent on both sides for the other factions are quite strong. Could they lead to violence? I am unsure of this moment, but I am wondering about it. I think it's important for us to look into martial law and people power. So, why did the people power revolution happen in the first place? It's a very contentious topic. Why did it happen? Many people from afar look into the revolution and think of it as this democratic revolution for a change in government. In reality, it's a bit more complicated than that. A lot of it was led by elites. Not only was it led by elites, but a big reason why it was very successful was that the military also went on the side of the people who were protesting. So it was the military people, the elites, many of the powerful businessmen, many of the local officials turned their back on the Marcos administration, and this coincided at a time when the Philippines was going through a lot of economic issues, not necessarily just because of what's going on in the Philippines, or what was going on in the Philippines at the time, but more global issues. There was a global recession in the 80s that led to a lot of these economic issues around the world, not just in the Philippines. And so there was a lot of economic instability during the late years of the Marcos administration, and that combined with many other factors, of course, in the social sphere, Leader's assassination, and all sorts of different things, led people to feeling like, well, maybe it's better for us to change the person in power. But the ones who chose that to do so were not really just the masses. Again, it was a coalition of masses, the elites, the Catholic Church, and the military. And without that very big coalition, it would not have been successful. Some people on the Marcos side of things I've heard someone argue that the reason why the revolution was peaceful and not bloody was because Marcos told his soldiers not to shoot, and therefore even Marcos somehow is able to get responsibility, a positive responsibility for not having there be any violence during the peaceful protest. Do I agree with that? It's not necessarily up to me. I wasn't there. I wasn't alive. I'm not privy to those private discussions, and I have no way of understanding all of what went on in 1986. What I do know is that confluation of factors led to people power happening. And it makes me wonder, well, if that is what was required to take down the Marcos dictatorship, what would be required to bring it back up into power as it is happening right now? There's a combination of, again, people not being as educated about our history in general, and I think the blame for the lack of education should not be on the voters. It should be on the educational system as administered by the last 30 years of presidencies and departments of education. It's not because of the people that they don't know about martial law. It's because we, in our curriculums, are not taught about martial law. I think that's a very important distinction. And there's also a lot of class barriers, for people who say, well, you should just educate yourself. Well, the barrier to being able to read many of these texts, I've read many of them that talk about this period of history. They're very inaccessible, not just because of the barrier to access, which is a big barrier, but also because of the way they are written. Even people who have English as their native language will not necessarily very easily go through some of these academic textbooks. They're not fun to read, they're not well written for the most part. And so this is an unfair thing, I think, to blame people for this, because again, one, they don't have access to it, and even if they did have access to it, they're not easy to read. And furthermore, even if they were easier to read, the scholarship is sometimes a bit, let's just say, there's a lot of disagreement with regard to many of the versions of events that have been, that are in books. There are a lot of debates about whether or not something is even necessarily true or well-founded or whatever. And when you go into that world of trying to figure out the answers for this stuff, you'll realize it's very difficult, even for someone with all the privileges of access, all the privileges of language acquisition, all the privileges of time to even go through any of these things. the answer at the end of hours and hours of months and months of reading is not clear, and so this idea that one group of people is less educated because of things of their own nature is not true. And even the people who are arguing that, who feel as if they are more educated because they are aware of certain facts, are not necessarily aware of how those facts are also disputed by other things, and they're not as clear cut as they seem. Or if, for example, again, this is maybe not a very popular opinion, but I'm one of my pet peeves recently has been seeing people post these infographics of things that make it seem like things are a certain way, but in reality, they lose a lot of the context of the times, but then they are presented as if it is the truth, and therefore, if you don't agree with this truth, it's not you're stupid. But in reality, the things that they're presenting are also filled with are lacking a lot of information. So it's unfortunate that it happens on both sides, and it's unfortunate that we don't have enough information about this time period that is easily accessible, easily readable, and trustworthy on a very kind of visceral sense. But there are many issues. So again, we're talking about the Civil War. Could there be a Civil War? I think, again, I worry about things in the perspective of, say, conspiracy theories. We've had the QAnon thing happen in the United States where, because of various things that people were thinking behind the scenes about the motivations for things happening in politics, it led them to some degree of action, or at least spreading of information, misinformation, disinformation, whatever you want to describe it as. I worry that no matter who wins the election, there'll be a big section of people emotionally, very, very emotionally involved, who've already alienated most of their friends, who will double down on their beliefs, whether or not it's pro or against or whatever it is, and will end up, even if there isn't a civil war, the extreme political polarization will not lead to anything good. It'll only lead to extreme division, and it doesn't help that, I don't know, it's complicated. Who are the people behind the success of certain candidates? Who are the people supporting? Where is the money coming from? Who will benefit from each presidency? A part of me, as much as I, many people were against the Marcos dictatorship because they were not economically benefiting from it. And so to what extent do the people who currently support the administration from the kind of higher ranks and the business elite, those people probably are doing it for the same reasons that they think if Marcos were to win, they would economically benefit from the situation. But I wonder if the same is true for other candidates as well. Who are the people who will economically benefit from the situation if this person wins or this other person wins? And which of those many different kind of scenarios will lead to a better state of things for, people outside those classes of privilege? It's a very complicated question. It's not easily answerable, and I worry about this. Now, will there be a civil war? If I keep thinking about it, I can't think of anything positive that can come out of this next election cycle. But do I think it can lead to violence? I think the Filipinos are not necessarily inherently violent. Or not that you can be inherently violent, but I don't think the Filipinos would necessarily be willing to take up arms. But the cause of violence sometimes can be not necessarily just from the people, the masses, but from the military. So what I'm wondering right now, actually, in order to resolve this question of mine, is what is the perspective of the current military? Is the military pro-Marcos? Because the Marcos did kind of build up the military for a very long time, and Duterte has been building up the military over the past 6 years. I think Duterte's support will mean a lot to the support of the military towards whoever candidate that will come out of this thing. But if the military is against the candidate who is winning or who will win, then it may create an issue where the military may decide to take action, and because they have the monopoly of weaponry and power and violence, they may take things into their own hands if they are extremely against the outcome. Over the past 6 years, if you were reading into it, the military have been getting better paid. The police and military are getting better paid. They've been getting more equipment. They've been getting some support from other countries and all this stuff. And so, is it possible that if the person who wins the elections is not on the side of the military, that the military may take action, and that the action that they may take can cause a civil war where it'll be, again, not about the people, but about two competing elite factions funding two different sides of the same coin, and the people in the middle suffering? Is that possible? I think it might be, if the military were to become involved. And so I think without the fact of the military, I don't think a civil war could happen, but I think at this point it will depend on how the military will approach the situation and how much support or lack of support they'll give to whoever ends up winning. I don't know what will happen, but I hope that none of my predictions come true.